This tiger would show up every day at a military camp, roaring to gain attention. When the soldiers decided to follow her, the reason left them in deep shock. Commander Briggs had just been assigned to an Indian military base close to the boundaries between neighboring countries. His official duty was to coordinate the rest of the soldiers in a 24-hour surveillance of the boundary, avoid illegal entry, and report any suspicious events. With 24 hours round-the-clock surveillance and scouts always discreetly patrolling the boundaries, Commander Briggs was doing a good job. However, little did Briggs know that nature had other plans in store for him at the military base. One day, the patrolling soldiers reported a quite unusual happening to him. A tiger was lurking in front of the military base. The striped creature had spent hours at a spot and sometimes patrolling the entrance of the base, as if trying to draw the attention of the humans. At first, Commander Briggs didn't give much attention to the presence of the tiger. After all, a tiger lurking around was not a serious issue, and definitely not part of his assignment. But maybe their enemies might have somehow hidden explosives in it and had managed to direct it to the entrance to harm the soldiers. Just to be sure it wasn't a trap, Briggs contacted the chief security, who confirmed that the tiger was clean, as they had scanned it as part of a security countermeasure. Commander Briggs knew how far military technology had developed and how robot animals were being disguised as actual animals to conduct reconnaissance and surveillance. To confirm the tiger wasn't a threat in the form of a spy robot disguised as a big cat, he instructed the chief computer analyst's security officer to scan the creature using ultraviolet devices, and this they did. However, the result came in as negative. It was just a normal animal. The tiger had been outside the entrance of the base for hours. Its presence started to concern him as he wondered why an apex predator would leave its hunting activities to come close to where humans were, rather than avoiding them totally. However, he decided not to give it much thought. Maybe the animal was just being naughty that day and would soon return back to the jungle and forget all about the camp. He instructed the soldiers on base not to shoot or harm the creature. It wasn't a threat, and their primary assignment wasn't to kill animals. He believed the tiger might have been fascinated by the structure of the base and the presence of humans, which was quite unusual. However, little did Commander Briggs know that there was more to the tiger than met the eye. Later that evening, the tiger had been roaring and prancing, drawing the attention of the soldiers on duty to it. That they couldn't understand that the tiger was in distress and trying to communicate something to them. They had thought it was hungry, but it was unlikely for a predator like a tiger to be in such a position, demanding food, when there were game in the jungle for it to hunt. And even if it was the case, they couldn't afford to give it any food to prevent its continuous visits, thereby disrupting their focus and duty to work. Little did they know that their assumptions were very far from the truth, and a shocking secret lay ahead about the tiger about to be unveiled. Later that evening, the tiger left, vanishing into the jungle, just as Commander Briggs had speculated, and everyone diverted their focus to their duty. The next day, more surprises lay in store for them, as their surveillance radar detected movements approaching the base. Everyone was on alert. However, they were disappointed when it turned out to be the same tiger that had visited the day before. Upon hearing the news again, Commander Briggs was shocked. What was going on? Was this a puzzle waiting to be solved? He was well convinced that there was something going on about the tiger. A predator like this wouldn't repeat coming to the base the next day if there wasn't something at play. Could it be that it wanted to lay in wait and ambush the patrol unit soldiers who occasionally drove in and out of the base? However, he quickly disregarded this idea. The patrol units had been going in and out of the base, and the tiger had not displayed any aggressive behavior towards the soldiers as they transitioned in their rovers. Soon, he could hear the loud roars from the tiger, prompting him to head to the watchtower to see it himself. Using a pair of binoculars to zoom down to the majestic and powerful creature, Briggs couldn't shake the feeling that the tiger was worried about something. From its body language and the way it roared and paced around, Briggs could feel that something was wrong. But what could it be? He was determined to find out. The next day, the arrival of the tiger convinced Briggs to do something to unravel why it had been coming around for days. While addressing the troops that day, he asked for 7 brave soldiers to volunteer in joining him on a special operation to find out why the tiger had been coming. He could feel that the cat was trying to gain their attention to a distressing issue. 7 brave soldiers devoted themselves to the quite unusual mission and were ready at their commander's request. The plan was to step outside the base on foot towards the animal, but keep a respectful distance just to see what the tiger was up to. If the tiger attacked, they would quickly fire a tranquilizer dart at it and call the animal centers to come get rid of it. However, nothing could have prepared them for what the tiger was truly up to. As soon as they had stepped out of the base, they pointed their rifles downward so as not to agitate it. They also kept their distance respectfully so as not to threaten the creature or agitate it. With this part of the plan executed, some had anticipated an attack, but they were wrong. As they waited to see what the tiger would do next, they were surprised at its odd behavior. The big cat started to quietly walk into the jungle, occasionally turning back to confirm that the humans were following behind. The soldiers exchanged glances and looked at Commander Briggs for orders. He signaled for them to follow the creature. They moved cautiously, every step filled with anticipation and curiosity. The tiger led them deeper into the jungle, its movements purposeful yet mysterious. For several hours, Commander Briggs followed the tiger across various challenging terrains along with his 7 volunteers. At some point, it started to seem delusional. Why were they following an animal to an unknown location? However, the tiger led on and they followed, eager to find out where it was leading them. Unlike his soldiers, Commander Briggs believed the tiger was leading them to something quite important or distressing. After close to 7 hours of venturing deeper into the wild expanse of the jungle, Commander Briggs knew that it was just a few miles before they would start to approach the territory of the neighboring country. They were not cleared for access, and if anyone spotted them, they would be accused of trespassing and breaching the agreements between the 2 countries. This could spell doom for his career and his unit, and he hoped that the tiger would soon reach where it was leading them. The soldiers were starting to grow weak. They had not packed any supplies or food and water, since they didn't expect to come that far. Yet, they pushed on, agile and vigilant. However, the tigers soon let out a deep growl, and the soldiers understood it as a signal that they were almost where it had been leading them. Commander Briggs, who was ahead of the rest, got down on one knee and raised an arm, signaling the rest of the soldiers to halt as they scanned their perimeters. The tension in the air was palpable as they waited for any sign of danger or indication of why the tiger had brought them to this place. That was when they discovered the shocking secret which made their hearts sink. The tiger had been trying to ask for their help all the while, and they couldn't understand until that moment. Right in front of them were 2 fatally injured cubs struggling to catch their breaths as they lay on the ground. It was then they realized that the tiger was actually a tigress, a mother trying to save her young cubs. She had constructed a makeshift nest-like structure using pieces of wood and put her 2 little cubs in it. The sight of it made Commander Briggs' heart melt that he couldn't yet fathom why and how the cubs sustained the injuries they had, but he knew it wasn't an attack from another animal. His heart sank when the cubs, excited to see their mother, briefly managed to get up but whined in pain as the injuries on their bodies didn't allow them to move comfortably. Even though Briggs had little knowledge dealing with animals, he understood that the tiger had come asking for help, and he knew he had to do something to save the cubs. Their injuries cut deep and were exposed, which meant they risked contracting an infection and maybe dying. All the while, the soldiers had kept a respectful distance to not agitate the mother tiger, and that was when Commander Briggs noticed something quite unusual a short distance away. It seemed someone had dug a shallow hole in the ground. But with his years of experience in combat, Commander Briggs knew that it wasn't a hand-dug hole. Besides, humans were forbidden in the area. So he ordered 2 of his men to go check out the scene and the unusual shallow hole in the ground a short distance away. He knew that it had to be a landmine, so he instructed them to watch out for them so there wouldn't be any casualties. While the 2 men proceeded to inspect the place, he quietly approached the tigress who was licking her cubs clean. Attempting not to agitate her, he moved slowly, speaking softly while the rest of the men stood watching, ready to interfere if things went south. However, the tigress shocked them when she didn't display any signs of aggression. Rather, she gave a little space to allow the human to inspect the cubs. Getting a closer look at the cubs, Commander Briggs couldn't hold back his shock. The innocent and adorable cubs had deep piercings and bruises only a shrapnel could inflict that he could tell from years of experience in combat. Just then, the 2 men he had sent came back to inform him that they had found mines littered at the location. The hole on the ground was caused by a landmine, which had been triggered and exploded. Commander Briggs was heartbroken when he realized that it was indeed pieces of shrapnel that had injured the cubs. The implication hit him hard. These innocent creatures, caught in the crossfire of human conflict, were suffering because of the actions of others. Briggs was deeply touched by the tigress' protective instincts to save her cubs by risking her life and contacting humans. As darkness descended upon the jungle, he decided not to let it all go to waste. He took out his satellite phone, instructing for backup and an extra vehicle so he could carry the cubs and the tigress back to the base. However, he shared his coordinates with them and instructed them not to pass some routes that were littered with mines for their safety. His plan was to contact the Animal Conservation Center to handle the tigress, which they now named Annie, in hopes that her cubs would be attended to by vets and nurtured back to good health before being released back to the jungle or taken to a zoo. With backup and transport arriving, they couldn't risk taking Annie along while she was still sober. Under his command, one of the men shot a tranquilizer at her, and within seconds, she drifted off to sleep. They didn't bother tranquilizing the cubs as they were already too weak and frail. Within an hour, the transport and backup arrived to move Annie and her cubs and the rest of the soldiers back to base. Seeing the scene, the new soldiers couldn't hold back their emotions and shock, as they now understood why the tigers had been showing up at the entrance of the base. The fact that this protective mother had risked her life to seek human assistance warmed their hearts and made them reevaluate how they viewed tigers and animals in general. This was certainly unlike any other operation they had been a part of. With Annie now tranquilized, they moved her and loaded her into one of the trucks and locked her in a cage. However, they were very careful when carrying the cubs so as not to cause them further pain and deteriorate their condition. Their wounds and injuries were so severe that some parts of their limbs had become stiff, causing Briggs to wonder if they would become disfigured, but he hoped for the best. They soon set off and arrived at the base. Upon arrival, they put the cubs in the same cage as their mother, so when she woke in the following morning, she wouldn't panic. In the middle of the night, Briggs made sure to contact the Animal Conservation Center, informing them of the urgent situation on the base. They soon reached an agreement to transport the animals to the center the following morning. But, seeing how frail the cubs' health was and not wanting to delay treatment, Commander Briggs didn't bother waiting for morning to order transport to the animal center. In the middle of the same night, he ordered that they depart with hopes that by morning, they would have arrived, and by then, Annie would have regained consciousness. The next morning, the transport team had arrived at the animal center and the staff there wasted no time in taking Annie and her cubs. With the tigress still tranquilized, they quickly separated her cubs from her for medical examinations. They were all moved to tears, seeing the serious injuries the cubs had sustained, and assumptions were that they had been around or close to the blast radius. Maybe straying before their mother when somehow the mine had exploded, causing them to be severely injured. The cubs were lucky that they hadn't lost any body parts. However, they needed urgent medical examination and, swiftly wiping their tears, the vets proceeded to the medical room, but hell broke loose when Annie woke up. She was terrified to find herself locked in a cage and, worse still, no sight of her cubs. The whole vicinity was filled with her thunderous roars as she vented her sadness, frustration, and need to see her cubs. Meanwhile, the vets reported sad news. One of the cubs had been severely affected by the wounds, which were left untreated for several days and required surgery due to the fact that the cub was still young. Amputation of the part of its limb affected wasn't considered, as her body could still heal and grow with the surgery. However, that would have not been the case if it was a full-grown tiger already. The other cub was also severely. The injuries had started to deteriorate, but didn't require surgery. The cubs were lucky to have been brought on time, because if there had been any more delays, they might have lost their lives due to infection and blood loss. The cubs were immediately placed on treatments and medications, with hopes that they recovered and responded to treatment. A week later, the vets finally started seeing the first signs of recovery. One of the cubs could now manage to stand without feeling too much pain, and sometimes even attempted playing with the medical staff, much to their excitement and surprise. It would always sniff their hands, expecting treats from them, though it was still recovering and wasn't fully strong, but its strength and agility impressed everyone. The cub that needed surgery had been operated on and had his legs bandaged. He had also started to recover gradually, much to the delight of the staff. Initially, when the siblings had been too weak, they had been given drips to help sustain their strength. After a while, the vets had started helping the cubs get the nutrients they needed by coming up with supplementary milk and bottle feeding. However, today, they decided to change the routine. For close to 2 weeks, Annie had not set her eyes on her babies and was always sad, sometimes refusing to eat and even displaying aggression towards the staff. It was a way to vent her frustration and anger, as she didn't know what had happened to her cubs. So, that day, the staff decided to help relieve her sadness. Now that the cubs were recovering, they believed getting direct and natural milk from their mother would contribute to a faster recovery process. Annie had not been expecting her cubs to be presented to her from a little opening in her cage. The whole staff gathered to witness a reunion like no other, as they watched amidst joyful tears and emotions. Annie, happy to see her cubs, licked them in her way of expressing her love to them and guided them to milk her. It was such a beautiful moment that captured the hearts of any who saw it. It seemed she could understand that the cubs were not fully healed and interacted gently with them, especially the one with a bandage on the legs. Thankfully, it was just a few more days before the cubs and Annie could be discharged and ready to be sent back to the wild. Commander Briggs was overjoyed when he heard the news of the recovery of the cubs and that they would be ready to be released back into the wild in a few days. However, something still worried him. The mines which injured the cubs were still there in the wild and could not only harm Annie and her family again, but other animals trying to thrive. Concerned, Briggs spoke with his superiors. It was determined that the mines were planted there by a very old government during a war that happened decades ago, and now there was no need for them anymore, as both countries were at peace. Besides, they had modern tools now that technology had advanced and didn't need to rely on mines to keep enemies out of their territories. There was also a need to bolster the population of animals like the tiger, whose numbers had been dwindling over the years. Eradicating the landmines was a major contribution in keeping these animals away from human conflict and harm, so they could thrive better in the wild. Arrangements were made to eradicate the mines with heavy machinery designed for the task. It only took 5 days to totally remove every mine around the boundaries of the country, leaving the jungle safer for animals to thrive. Finally, the day arrived for Annie to be released back to the wild. Briggs felt a sense of pride and accomplishment as he watched her disappear into the jungle, happy to know that he would never see her again. Or at least, that's what he thought. The very next morning, the soldiers were greeted by Annie's presence again outside the base, but she wasn't alone this time. Her 2 cubs were there with her. Briggs felt this was the tigress's way of showing gratitude and asked his soldiers to be quiet for a minute in salute. Then she left, and this time, never returned. Pondering on the events, Briggs smiled at himself as he knew that he had made the wild safer for the animals in it. A soldier's job was to fight and defend, and he had done exactly this for nature's inhabitants, by taking out the harm in their habitat. Though he never saw Annie again, she and her cubs would always hold a special place in his memories. What a beautiful story! Would you have followed the tigress into the jungle? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.